All right, Justin, and we can go ahead and admit it is 1 o'clock, so let's just go ahead and get started, and hopefully some people will kind of filter in as we go. Well, all right. So this session will be recorded. We have started that recording. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Center for Community-Based Learning for our first webinar in our summer 2021 Back to the Community series. And this one is entitled Entrance to Capstone, a past, present, and future snapshot of community-based learning. My name is Dr. Allery Gibbs. I'm the curricular coordinator with the Center for Community-Based Learning, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Justin Sipes, our center's assistant director, will be our co-moderator for this session as well. Today, our presenters will share their experiences with community-based learning over the past year, challenges, successes, and where they see their community-based learning courses and partnerships going in the upcoming year as we move into a post-pandemic environment to teaching and learning. After the presentation, our panelists will be available for questions from the audience. We kindly ask that our audience members keep their video and audio turned off during the presentations to prevent any unintended distractions. During our Q&A portion, if you have any comments or questions at that time, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, or if you prefer, type it into the chat and Justin will be monitoring that feature. This session is being recorded so that it can be accessed in the future via our Center for Community-Based Learning events page on our website, where you'll find a link to our YouTube channel. I'd like to introduce to you our panelists for today, who are going to guide us through a little bit of a time travel by looking at a first year and senior year student access, or what our center refers to as gateways to community-based learning. We have Dr. Leslie Kaplan, Director of Hicks Honors College. Leslie will be presenting on Honors First Year Colloquium, and Dr. Alan Harris, Associate Professor of Engineering, is going to speak on the Senior Design Capstone course. So let's go ahead and begin with our first panelist, Leslie Kaplan. Thank you for being here. Leslie's going to present on community-based learning from that first year honors student experience. And whenever you are ready, go ahead. You should be able to share your screen if you need to.
Thank you very much. Let me just get this pulled up and started. Yes, thank you very much, and I really appreciate being asked to talk about this, and welcome to everybody who's joining us. I've been doing community-based learning in my first year class since 2010, and was able to navigate through COVID and have almost all of the different opportunities available to students in spite of COVID. And I think that the reason was, and this is kind of my main point, is that I was able to, over the course of these years, I've been able to really understand the whole ecosystem. And so I'm part of it now. And it meant that the partnerships that I have are truly equal partnerships. There's trust on both sides. Both sides are getting benefit. And so everybody is willing to kind of do a little extra to make it work, even under the challenges of COVID. So a little bit of background. The class that I teach this in is for honors freshmen. The majority of honors freshmen take this class, so it generally enrolls between 160 and about 200. I have 10 to 12 breakout groups, each with 16 to 20 students. Each group is involved in a different service project. I have generally all 10 to 12 groups are in a service project, but they're different. Typically about 9 different kinds of service projects available that students can choose from. One thing I think that is a key to making community-based learning work is that there is some choice in the students so that they have some investment in what they're doing because it's something they selected, not something that they were told to do. So mine are voluntold to do something, but they can choose what that something is going to be. The students are 100% freshmen in this class, and they're from all majors in the university, which again provides both challenge and opportunity. The kinds of the class is on immigration and national identity, and I started it in 2010. My background is in folklore, and I'm very interested in different cultures. I do a lot of study abroad, but I'm also interested in exploring other cultures at home. So this was kind of a natural world for me to explore. I picked up on a existing contact that my predecessor, Heather Burke, had made and had been nurturing for about a decade before me with Lutheran Social Services to work with our local refugee population. So starting there, I was able to build it into what it is now. So when she was doing it, her students were working, mentoring individual families, and through Lutheran Social Services, which is one of 3 refugee resettlement agencies in Jacksonville. And starting with that partnership, I was able to work outwards. So now our students are mentoring children. It started with mentoring families in the home, has now evolved to working with children at a YMCA after school program who are below grade level, most of whom are immigrants and refugees. We run soccer programs at 2 local public elementary schools, which are both ESOL schools with very large populations of children coming from other countries. We work with Catholic charities on adult tutoring for adults who are trying to learn English, who are all refugees. We have a group that runs events. Before COVID, the events were held in the UNF Crossings dormitory, which is where my students live, because we're also part of a living learning community, an LLC. But during COVID, we moved that to where the children were, which was at a YMCA because they were still in person there. We have a group that does fundraising, which is what helps support all of these other activities. We have a group that we call philanthropy that works with different organizations, different nonprofits, and with the philanthropy community in Jacksonville to raise money to give directly to an organization for a particular project that relates to refugees or immigrants. We collect used clothing, generally winter clothing. A lot of the refugees come from hot climate countries and don't arrive with a lot of winter clothing, so we are collecting jackets and sweatshirts and sweaters, and also soccer gear, because part of what we're doing is soccer. We have a group that does PR, and we have a group that makes some documentary films, either about the students' experience or about the organizations. And on the other side is a list of the different partners that we are currently working with last year and this year. I thought it would be helpful. The reason, so I started with Lutheran Social Services, expanded outward, and the way that I did it, I think, is by thinking about ecosystems. And basically, I was very open to anybody who said, oh, I want you to meet this person. I jumped at it and met whoever that was, and then got to know what they're doing, and was creative in thinking about, like, oh, I like the work that you're doing. You need volunteers. Let's see if there's a way that we can partner, and then kind of built over time all of the different opportunities. So looking back on it, I think what helped be successful was thinking about it in terms of ecosystems. So I thought I would just kind of share the ecosystems that I've uncovered. I'm a folklorist, which is kind of like a cultural anthropologist. So this all makes sense to me. So this is a list of the state, national, and international ecosystem, the kind of major players. And what you'll notice about it is that it is 100% acronyms. So I had to have a pretty high tolerance for learning the lingo. My favorite one is the one on the bottom right corner, the VOLAGs, which is voluntary agencies, became a new word, VOLAG, and these are the 9 organizations that are authorized anywhere in the United States to resettle refugees. There are only 9 of them, and almost all but one of them are religious. So it's a public, faith-based set of partnerships that are the organizations that are responsible for resettling refugees. So knowing this state, national, and international ecosystem, if I were to talk to a colleague in another state, I would be able to help them identify by starting with that larger set of ecosystem information that I have, and then figuring out which ones were active in their local communities. Here are the 9 VOLAGs, and you can see very clearly that they're all religious except for one of them. The Jacksonville refugee ecosystem is constantly evolving. It tends to be little nonprofits that pop up and then fall by the wayside because they're run by 1 or 2 passionate people with an idea. One of the ways that I was able to learn about this ecosystem was by tapping into the superstructure, the third one on the right on the top. Department of Children and Families has a refugee task force, and I started attending those meetings. And even today, I'll attend as many of those meetings as I can because it helps me understand the ecosystem. And as I'm there and I'm listening to what other people are doing, I'm always listening for connections, because even if I don't need them this year, it may be that there's some opportunity for the future, and kind of knowing their history, even if I don't make contact right away, assists me in being able to connect with them. And again, the more people that I know, the more people I can connect with in the future. So Department of Children and Families, the Refugee Task Force meetings, they meet every once a month, and I got myself on their email list. Thankfully, their meetings are now Zoom, which I hope continues. So I can even be doing other work as I'm kind of listening to what's going on in the local ecosystem. And that's the one that really opened all of this up to me, because then I was able to see anybody who's working in this field ends up connecting at some point, maybe not every month, but at some point to that meeting. And so that's really what clued me into the fact that this was an ecosystem and I needed to really kind of understand how it works. So the way that it works in Jacksonville, they're the primary refugee resettlement organizations. There were 3. One of them no longer works in Jacksonville. World Relief closed as it contracted over the last 4 years. It does not look like that's going to be opening up, so we're down to 2. And then the middle one on the top is immigrant and refugee nonprofits. And these are these little tiny ones that are really run by a single person or a couple that are doing amazing work, really, really, really need our support. So the support that we're able to offer to some of these is invaluable to them, which means that the work that I'm able to have my students do is very meaningful work, which is inspirational to not even a quarter of my 200 students continue in this work, but I have had probably 20 or 30 students that I could think of who continued working with one of these little nonprofits, ended up with an internship, really contributed to those nonprofits, and also launched them in some way in their career. One example I have is a young man who worked with one that has now been folded into Beyond 90. It was a mental health program. He worked at it as a volunteer and then as an intern later. He went into scientific research and was working in a lab for a couple of years, but is now applying to medical school and wants to work with immigrant refugee families, and so has continued. So even though he's going into medicine, this was a transformational experience for him, which helped him understand what population he really wanted to work with. So I've got a number of stories of individual students like that who found something their freshman year, continued that interest, and then we're able to parlay that into a piece of their career. Often it's the piece that really is the driving force. They want to help. Big abstract idea. They're freshmen, and then as they go through by starting in their freshman year, it gives them opportunities to allow it to shape their career, because this isn't a one and done. Because it's freshman year, there are opportunities to continue. So particularly working with those small nonprofits, which often are, like I said, they're very small, but because they're kind of one-person operations, they're also very flexible. So when they find a student that is willing to contribute and is doing good work, they will often be able to make a transformational partnership where the work that they're able to offer the student is really keyed to the student's interest. And so it has that benefit to both of them. And then I'm also aware of the secondary support services. And then the other ones have opened up possibilities for other kinds of partnerships where often I can help organizations utilize some of UNF's resources, particularly room space for events. I'll co-host events with, we've for 2 years, we've co-hosted the Rwandan Genocide Memorial and held it at UNF. Honor students are allowed to attend. Anybody at UNF is allowed to attend. I attend, and they get room space for free. So it ends up being a really great partnership, brings richness, cultural richness to our university population, and offers space, which is at a premium in the city for other groups. So I love those kind of spin-off, which is another piece, to me, another advantage of thinking about it as an ecosystem, is that people know to reach out to me, that where I can, I will always try to help. And who knows what comes of that for UNF, for students, for the organization. So I find that really helpful. So thinking about pre-pandemic, during pandemic, post-pandemic, I just have a few slides of some of the kinds of activities. So this is a holiday event on campus that was pre-pandemic. Clothing drive. These are the winter gear that we collect, and where we create a little free store, and the kids get to choose what they want. The students get to help them figure out what's going to be the right size and color, and it's a great experience for everybody. We've done Thanksgiving at UNF. This is at the fountains. Kids are playing games here. This is all pre-pandemic. We've partnered with the UNF men's soccer team, and they run a wonderful clinic on the UNF soccer fields in the stadium. This is a little cheering group that didn't want to play soccer, but we're really happy to be the cheering squad. During the pandemic, we were able to pivot because the agencies knew me, trusted me, and it was an existing partnership. And so even though it was a little bit more work for everybody, they were eager to try to make the situation as normal as they could for the kids. So they were in person and said, yes, we can't go to you, but if you want to come to us, and we were able to make that work because everybody was already invested in this partnership. So these are some pictures from the YMCA where we held our holiday events. And then we were also able to pivot to do a lot of our online things by tutoring. I was not able to get pictures of the actual tutoring sessions because of privacy concerns for refugees, but these are some of the kids who were our tutors. So it can be a lot of work cultivating an ecosystem like that, but for me, it's incredibly rewarding work. It's my way of giving back to the community, as well as finding opportunities for our students. And, you know, the relationships and friendships that I've made over the course of 12 years now, working with people in these organizations has also made it personally worthwhile. And I think that's all that I have to offer, unless there are specific questions. I'm happy to take them afterwards as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely stick around for the Q&A session, because I certainly have questions, and I love that idea of the ecosystem. And I think that's true, not just of refugee, but, you know, I have most of my experiences in the arts and culture sector. But, you know, I always tell people, once you have a partner, they have so many partners, so you sort of inadvertently take on, as you put it, an ecosystem. So that's very interesting. Thank you very much. So for our next panelist, we have Alan Harris from Electrical Engineering. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Alan is going to discuss a senior design capstone course for electrical engineering students. This gateway, as we often refer to it, is on that opposite end of the community-based learning spectrum, and it's more advanced students at this level are nearing the completion of their degrees, and the community partner organization is really expecting a certain level of skill and experience at this point. So Alan, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Let me see if I can figure out sharing my screen. I don't have my dual screens like I normally do. Okay, do I have the PowerPoint up? Okay, so yes, I'm in the completely the opposite end. So I'm in the capstone design sequence of the engineering coursework. And this is something we've ended up branding this as the Osprey design experience, is what we've started calling our capstone experience. So I just have a couple slides to kind of explain what we do in the Osprey design experience. And then in terms of the pandemic, I'll just kind of talk about that at the end. I don't have nice slides for that. But in terms of what we're doing, obviously all our engineering programs at UNF are all ABET accredited. And the Osprey design experience, we work with electrical and mechanical engineering together. And both these programs, the ABET accreditation requires a capstone experience in which students design, build, and test a complete engineering project. So this, for a lot of the students, this is the first time that they take an engineering project from a concept, an idea, the whole way through calculations, using all the information they got in other courses, to designing it, laying out CAD drawings, all that type of things. And then they actually have to build this and in the end test it and validate that their design worked. Did it meet their design requirements that were set in the project? So it's kind of that very comprehensive end to an engineering program. And it ends up being, it's a 2-semester sequence that the students go through. So the fall semester, they take Capstone Design 1, spring semester is Capstone Design 2. The first semester, they spend a lot of time kind of defining, they've got to define what the problem is that they're trying to solve. They have to generate multiple solutions, brainstorming sessions, go through down selection processes to come up and figure out what's the best design. So define all the technical aspects of the design, and then actually get starting in and doing calculations and things like that. And then the spring term is generally the term where they jump right in and start building these projects and get as far as they can, have crazy rush the last kind of 2 weeks of the semester to get to some form of testing where they can actually test and take measurements to validate if the project worked or didn't work. If it didn't work, they have to justify and explain why it didn't work. So over the years of developing this, the Osprey design experience has become a fully industry sponsored experience. So every single team in the class works with an industry sponsor, almost exclusively from kind of the greater Jacksonville area, but we've had partners as far away as kind of Melbourne. We work with one just outside of Gainesville. And what we've done is electrical and mechanical engineering are, we end up, a lot of projects require aspects of both. So we've ended up fully integrating the 2 courses into one. So Dr. Steve Stagon from mechanical engineering teaches that section, and we cross-list the 2 courses. So we put them all in a big auditorium for the lectures, and teams are generally interdisciplinary as well. So again, one of the other requirements for this capstone design is one of the things we have to assess in there is teamwork. So everyone has to work on a team-based project. It's the one, engineering is extremely team project intensive. And it's also the kind of the headache that a lot of people, students, especially engineering students, seem to hate working on teams a lot of the time. So, and in this class, we assess students functioning on a team. So as I mentioned, most of these projects end up being interdisciplinary projects. And we do end up with some that are purely mechanical and some that are purely electrical. But I'd say normally about 80% of them are interdisciplinary. And kind of one of the measures for us of if a program's working is, for us, ABET accreditation is so important, is what does the accrediting body think of what we're doing? And 2 years when we went through our last accreditation visit, when ABET came to the campus and reviewed it, they, the one class they always look at Introduction to Engineering, and they always look at capstone design. And the capstone design, in their report, they called that the gold standard of capstone design, what we're doing at UNF. So we were very, very pleased with it. So, and in terms of scale, we've kind of really been doing this formally since about 2013. And we've worked with, I think it's up to about 35 different industry partners now, and more than 120 different capstone design projects. And the number just keeps growing rapidly. You know, when we started, we had, between the electrical and mechanical class, we maybe had about 10 projects. The last couple of years, we've had 22 to 24 projects every year. So it's a lot of students working at the same time. And we've been up around 120 students enrolled in the class each semester now. So to just kind of give you an idea of who we've been working with lately, this was our 2020-21 sponsors. So again, the vast majority of them, these are Jacksonville-based companies. And I think we've got some really good names, big names that we've worked with. But we're also really proud of some, like Inspired Energy we work with. And they're a smart battery company that's located in Newberry, Florida, right outside of Gainesville. And they work with us, not the University of Florida. So we're really proud of that one. And we added Delta P Carver that's down near Melbourne this year. So we've got companies coming from further around. So what we do when we work with these companies is we spend the summer going out and meeting with these companies and trying to see if they have projects that they'd like the students to work on. So what we ask them for is, do they have any project at the company that's kind of on there, we'd love to do this list, but it's not so mission critical that it has to get done immediately, but it's something they'd love to have someone work on. Or also look for something that they're kind of looking for something creative, that maybe someone who's been working at the company that kind of gets stuck inside their box, but something where someone can give them something totally outside the box, a different solution that they'd be thinking of. So this summer we go out and meet with the companies, kind of help them, step them through identifying projects. They run ideas by us, see what we're thinking. We take tours of all the different companies. They can actually show us what they're doing. A lot of these are manufacturing companies, so they're kind of seeing the process is kind of a key to this. And then during the summer, as we meet with all these companies, we go through and we make a list of all the projects we have. And we'll work with the companies. Some company might want to sponsor one project, but they have 3 ideas. So we let them submit 3 ideas to that list, and then we'll help use student selection to kind of whittle it down to what was the most popular one. So then when the fall semester gets there, what we're doing now is we give the students kind of a modified Myers-Briggs personality test, and then we give them a project selection form where they give us those results, and they list their top 5 projects in order of preference that they'd like to work on. And then we ask them a series of other questions about their hands-on experience, their previous design experience, you know, what role do they think they take on a team. And then we get into a big room with a bunch of whiteboards and spend probably 8 hours trying to form the teams. So we've eliminated the one thing. When I started the capstone design, it was we kind of nicknamed it back then senior put stuff together. It was all just students working on projects. They made their own teams. They came up with their own project idea, and then they used what money we had from lab fees for a really small budget to kind of build something for a couple $100. And when I took it over, when I say the biggest thing I got from this class is I felt like I was a couples therapist, because all the students wanted to work with their best friends, and then they'd get involved in this big project they had to work on the whole year, and they end up fighting like crazy and have teams in my office. They said this person did this, they're not doing this, and it wasn't very pleasant dealing with that. Not my forte. And so we started, when we did the industry one, kind of said, we're making this as real world as possible. You don't get to choose. You get to express interest where you want to work, but you don't get to choose the project. We're going to put you on the team. And we try to, you know, I think there's maybe been once in the last 10 years that we haven't put a student on a project that was in their top 5. So they generally get a project that's in their top 5 choice, but they don't get to choose their team. So the one thing we've noticed that to us, it feels like we have a lot less inter-team conflict. And especially having gone from, you know, about 8 teams to 24 teams was the most we have, there's definitely been a lot less conflict. And I would expect with 24 teams to see a lot more. So then once we've assigned the teams, we kind of send the students out to work with the companies, and the companies have given them this very brief generic project description. So they have to go and meet with an engineer at the company and take the project the whole way from defining what is the project they're actually working on. So they have to go there and go prepared with a list of questions to try and figure out what the project is, and then go the whole way through the design, build, and test process. And so as I feel interesting to kind of see, what do some of these look like? And you can kind of see, so this was a project where they worked with a local company, Stenner Pumps. And the company wanted there's a little gearbox on their pump that has grease in it. And they wanted that process to be automated, where a machine would put grease in that instead of a person. But this kind of is a great one for me to kind of show what the students go through. So this was kind of their starting point on the left here, where they have this little hand sketch that they did of what they think their project's going to look like. And then as the semester progresses, they got to the point where they were laying out CAD pictures and had a plan of what they're going to build. And then up on the right there was kind of the final product, where they actually built this thing, tested it. And a lot of these, they get what we tell companies at the end, you should expect something that you would think of as a really, really good prototype. And your goal should be that you could put the engineers in your company on it for 10, 20 hours, and they could kind of work out all the kinks and stuff, because it is obviously student led projects. Just to show a couple other things, what they look like. So kind of the scale. This was a project they're working on for Johnson & Johnson 3D Printing Center of Excellence that's actually on the UNF campus. And this is a huge, it's an 8-foot long table that they built this on. And this was actually just swiping a little bit thin layer that they wanted to put a thin substrate onto something. So it's all automated pneumatic cylinders and actuators that automatically apply this substrate to the machine. And then I got one more to kind of show the smaller one. So, and this one I love that because their CAD drawing ended up looking so much like the real one. So on the left side was the CAD rendering of the project, and the right side was their final project. And this one was a smart battery tester. So a smart battery is kind of like the battery in your iPhone. It's not just like a AAA battery. There's it has a whole bunch of circuits in there, and it monitors, I think this one's monitor like 16 different parameters. So this was one the students actually designed and built, where they could just plug this company's smart battery into it, and then it's a little touch screen, and it could take all the measurements of 16 different things and display it on the touch screen. It actually had Bluetooth to link it to computers and things like that. So they're very in-depth projects. I think that was all the slides I had, so I'll stop sharing and put my face back up. So when you're working with the capstone design, the big things we had with this is kind of our goal with this was, one of the most important things to me for an engineering student is that they have had an internship or something as they go through school. They're going out into a very competitive field, and if they haven't had any form of internship or anything, they're not going to have the edge. Even if they have a 4.0 GPA, the company's going to look and say, well, did you intern anywhere? So with this program at UNF now being 100% industry sponsored, we can kind of tell the students, if you weren't able, you're a student who had to work 40 hours a week to support yourself and you couldn't do an internship, you're going to have a whole section on your resume of, this was the capstone design project that I did with Mercedes-Benz. I actually went on site. Some of the companies, depending on how the company runs it, some actually give our project teams access to the facility. They give them ID badges and things so they can just go in there and work on the project. So it's been incredibly successful in getting students real world experience. I'd say that the biggest part that I wasn't prepared for probably was the logistics, and especially now when we're getting up to 20 plus projects, a couple companies will sponsor 2 at the most. So when I say with 24 projects, we probably had 18 different industry sponsors then. So when you start planning this, you kind of think, well, it's really good for us to check in for like 30 minutes with each industry sponsor every week. And then you suddenly realize, like, well, that's like 9 hours or something ridiculous at this point. We cannot do that. So there's a lot of just, let the students go out there, and we have to kind of trust that they're going to tell us if there's an issue, and that the industry sponsor is going to tell us if there's an issue. The other thing, obviously, is program like this is the budget of doing something like this. So we ask the industry sponsors to pay for everything. And we've had project budgets for these go from, some of the smaller companies have come up with small projects that have maybe been, $500 to $1,000. And we've had one project was actually $120,000 was the budget. So, then you add that stress if you have students working on something and this company's spending over $100,000 and you're like, are the students just going to completely mess this up? I really hope they're going to give them something. But it also brings in things, when you start the year, it's a company in great shape and they're buying things and everything's great. And then we actually had a sponsor a couple of years ago that it was a venture capital startup, and halfway through the year they were sold. So we kind of lost the company. So then you've got, what do we do with these students? But as we've built this, we've worked through and been able to realize, making use of other resources on campus. So obviously in this, one of the things that came up early on is we have students working on projects for a company. And obviously the company wants the project at the end, but the students have worked on this in class. So there's things like intellectual property in that we didn't think of. So we suddenly found ourselves in this whole legal situation that we're looking at. So to kind of develop the program, we worked with John Cantner and ORSP. So we run the whole program through ORSP now. And we're now entering the third year where we've started asking companies, in addition to paying for all the supplies and everything for the project, we actually ask them to support the program as well. So they make they do a zero overhead academic grant is how they support the program. So each company, we ask them to pay into the program. And then when they pay in, we've actually, John was able to develop for us, we have a standardized non-disclosure agreement that the students enter into with the company and assign IP rights over to the company. So, you start of this program and you're thinking, it'd be really cool for students to work on just a real world project as an engineer. And then, I always joke that the syllabus for this course looks like a legal document. My syllabus is normally a page, and I think we're up to about 14 pages for this one now of kind of explaining all these side aspects that you think of. So that's kind of what the program looks like. So then in terms of COVID, obviously it has to be a design, build, and test experience. So when we first got shut down for COVID, there was that week before spring break, where spring break for these engineering students is normally their week of, they spend 80 hours that week, kind of getting their projects to the point where they're supposed to be and they're all caught up. And that Friday, we had to send out an email to the students saying, you're not allowed back on campus. You cannot go to where your project is. You cannot continue working on the project. And a lot of them, all your personal stuff is kind of locked in there. Because at that point, we couldn't even go back to get their stuff. We were still figuring out how we would do that. And then obviously we were at that point also following up with, I think like 18 companies then, kind of explaining, your stuff's locked on campus. We can't get to it. The students aren't finishing anything. It was the first time we'd asked companies to pay for it. So they actually paid money, and we're like, you're just going to kind of get a report at the end of what students would have done. And then moving into the next year, and that the one good thing is that the companies were incredibly understanding. Obviously, that was all a new experience for them too. I don't think they were expecting even what they got at that point when we kind of shut down. I think they probably thought we'd just vanish and they wouldn't hear anything. But then obviously the next year planning, you're now planning for a class that is definitely a class that is only intended for face-to-face instruction. And everything's hands-on. Our meetings, we go and meet with the students while they're working on their projects, walk around with them, they show us what they're working on. And suddenly, there's, between the two classes, we're at 110 people. So even if we'd wanted to do face-to-face, there wasn't a room on campus where we could do face-to-face. So now we're in this capstone design where in the fall semester, we ended up scheduling it completely fully remote. So we had students kind of working remotely, but we had to figure out and make sure we were able to let them come onto campus when they were allowed to come onto campus. But then we also, because we have one big room where we normally assign students, we had to split this into, I think we used about 5 different rooms. and we had to set up our COVID sign-in sheets for them so that we knew who was in the room at what time, when they came in, when they left, making sure that, you know, this room that normally has 50 people in only had 10 people at a time. And we did actually end up having to contact student health services and tell them, like, here's all the information for contact tracing to let people know who was exposed and when they were in the room. And then the spring term, we ended up scheduling into the hybrid so that we could kind of, because, you know, the interesting thing in the pandemic is, you know, everything went remote pretty much, but things like ABET accreditation didn't change and say you don't have the build requirement anymore. So we had 20 projects last year that had to have a build requirement. And by that point, I think some students were probably not even in Jacksonville. So, you know, it was kind of juggling all those different balls at once and having students in, you know, we had students in multiple rooms working on stuff. But, you know, I think on the whole, it was a success. And, you know, all the students managed to get it done. They got through it. And the companies were incredibly supportive. You know, we joked last year when we were doing this, you know, the summer we kind of go through and you see the number of projects building up. You know, last year when we were meeting with the companies, obviously it was all through Zoom. And, you know, the end of July, where we're normally putting together our final list, we were kind of joking, being like, if we have 2 industry-sponsored projects this year, we're just going to be amazed. We won't believe that 2 people-sponsored projects with what we're kind of telling them how we're going to have to do stuff. And that last 2 weeks, everything kind of came together, worked out. We ended up with our 20 projects that we needed. You know, a lot of the companies, we had less companies that were able to support the grant this year. We noticed they were kind of, we just don't have the money to do it, but we still want to sponsor a project. But we're also seeing, you know, this year, I feel like it's become enough of a success. We were meeting with someone yesterday, they've sponsored projects from the start, and they're busy building a new building and getting ready to move. And they said, you know, we don't think we'll be able to support a project this year in the middle of a move, but we're really looking at how we can still actually give you guys the academic grant to make sure that we hold our place in line for the following year, to make sure we don't kind of get bumped down the list. So, you know, I think the companies are really, they enjoy working with the students. A lot of the students end up, you know, this is in theory their last semester of college. We've had a lot of students go straight from their project to being hired at that company. We also have a lot of those sponsors contacting us directly at the end of the class and saying, you know, you just taught this class, who do we need to talk to? And, you know, we have students, I think this summer I had 4 students that didn't even apply for a job. I just had these industry sponsors sending me emails and saying, can you send me a resume? And I contact the student and send the resume directly to the company. And the student would say, hey, they called me and I have a job offer like a couple hours later. So, you know, I think it's been a really good thing for the students to kind of see that. So, and, you know, moving forward, it's not something we plan on changing. We're launching the advanced manufacturing program over in engineering, and we're going to merge that one as well. So it'll be the 3 programs together when we do the capstone design, when they get there. And, you know, we're just going to keep growing this and keep working with companies. We, you know, every year there's a couple companies that say we're going to take a year off, and we add a couple more companies. But, you know, the big part in the past was, you know, this was a really hard recruiting. I think almost all the new companies we have coming in next year reached out to us. You know, we'll get a message on LinkedIn now saying, hey, we've heard about this Osprey design experience. We'd like to sponsor a project. Can you meet with us? So it's been a great experience. So I think I'll leave it there and let you get to the question and answer stuff.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that is really, really cool. I think this is the first presentation of this community-based learning where most of the partnerships have not been nonprofit. So most of the time it's very nonprofit heavy. So I really appreciate you, you know, showing how you work with all these, I guess, for-profit entities, because a lot of other colleges and departments, some have trouble saying, well, you know, how would we fit into kind of a nonprofit landscape? But here you're showing how it doesn't necessarily have to be a nonprofit, and these bigger industries are just as willing to work with you in many of the same capacities as some of our other faculty and colleges that do this community-based work. So
Yeah,
thank you very much for sharing that.
we have actually worked with nonprofits. When we started, we had a couple as we're trying to build these relationships, and we do in the in the documentation we actually offer a nonprofits can put forward a project and there's no charge to them. But again, they kind of end up with it. They still have to pay for supplies. So I don't know if you noticed on this year's there was Ronnie Van Zant Park was a partner, and one of their benefactors actually sponsored the project and bought the. They were working on designing a solar lighting station. They're looking at putting in an art maze at the park there. The civil engineering equivalent class of this was designing the structure for the art maze, and our students were working with him designing the solar lighting station. So we have had benefactors step in and do stuff for nonprofits now too, though.
Nice. Yes, I definitely like hearing all the different ways to collaborate. All right, so let's move into our question and answer portion. So I'll invite our participants. It'll probably mostly be me and Susan. Thank you for joining us. Susan is our co-curricular coordinator with the Center for Community-Based Learning. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. I'll get us started with a few. So I know you guys have touched on this a little bit, and not necessarily even at UNF, but how long have you been teaching or involved in community-based learning or community partnerships? Maybe tell us a little bit of how it all started for you, and I'll give you both an opportunity to respond. Let's start with Leslie.
Thanks. I got involved right when I was hired into honors in 2010. So basically my whole time with honors, I've been involved. It's a central piece of what's important to honors about the first year experience is having some opportunity to be developing some leadership skills and also think about giving back to the community. So.
Thank you. Alan, same question.
And I think I started the community when it was about 2012, 2013, around there. And I actually pitched it to my director at the time of going through the Community Scholars Program to start launching this industry-sponsored capstone design that we needed to look at how we work with the community. So I went through the Community Scholars with this as my goal of what I was doing. And now 10, 12 years later, I'm still teaching that class.
Well, that's great. Did you expect it to kind of take off the way it did?
I think when we started, when that former director interviewed, he said one of the things his goal was to have, every student works for a company on their capstone design project. And he came from a very small private school, and we kind of, it was Paul Eason and I teaching it back then. We were like, that's a lovely goal, but there's no way we can get that many projects. And we can, and we've had up to 24 projects going at a time. So I don't want any more, but.
That's really amazing. And Leslie, has your honors colloquium always been about 200 students?
Yeah, it has. It's we're actually getting more students in honors, so we've expanded the options. So there are students who are taking Self and Society or Model US, which are different themes, and they don't all have the focus on community service, but the colloquium itself has always been about 200.
Awesome, thank you. Let me open up. Susan, I don't know if you had any questions. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to ask some, please, by all means.
Thanks, Valerie. You may have answered this question. I'm not sure, but if this question would be for Leslie. Leslie, do you ever have issues with students who perhaps can't commit time outside of class to completing the community service projects? And if so, because of their, life issues or whatever, and if so, how do you address that or deal with that?
That's a great question. It was easier before UNF started, or maybe it's a state policy, I'm not sure, but before the policy of strongly encouraging students to take 15 credit hours. We used to encourage them to take 12 credit hours in their freshman year, and so they're worth a little bit more time. So that has been a problem for a number of years. Not all of the projects require as intensive amount of time outside of the class. So students who choose to be mentors or tutors or something where they're working directly with an organization do have to commit 3 hours a week, and that's the expectation. The other students, I mean, the expectation across the board is about 3 hours a week, but I don't think it is as necessary in some of the projects. So if they're organizing events off campus, there's only 2 events. So the number of weeks where they really need to have 3 hours outside of the class is smaller. So there's a little bit of flexibility. And for some of them who are doing the PR, it's 3 hours a week, more or less, but it's really flexible time because they're posting on social media. So that's one of the places where I feel like having the options available so that the students are choosing what it is that they want to do. So typically the ones who really do want to work with children or adults have that option. They know what they're getting into. They value it. And the ones who are less enthusiastic about that, they don't choose those intensive activities. So I think that idea about having choice is really important, at least at the freshman level. And I think it's probably different in a senior design class or something like that, where this is really central to their graduation and their skill building to be qualified to leave. But at the freshman level, it's really just an introduction.
So we do see some issues with student time commitment. So we make the students, they submit a weekly memo to us. And in that memo, each student has to track the number of hours that they worked outside of class time. And the reason we started that is just for us to get a gauge so that when we're working with the companies, we kind of can tell them what to expect in terms of student effort and things. And we tell the students, this is a senior capstone design course. It's a 3-credit course. You should maybe 9 to 10 hours a week outside of class time. And when we kind of look at all those hours they log, and I think this last year we maybe averaged like 4 hours a week. And I assume they're kind of exaggerating how many hours they're working too when they report it to us. So there's some issues with getting them to put in the time that we're expecting of them.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about partnerships. I'm a little interested to know, how do you measure success? And you can talk about it in terms of, the course in the classroom, but maybe also in terms of the community partner. How are they measuring it, and are those the same? And Leslie, we'll go ahead and start with you.
It's a challenge because we don't have anything. I mean, we can measure the number of children that we service, and we can measure the number of jackets we've collected and things like that. We can measure the amount of money that got raised. In terms of impact on students, I am engaged with tremendous help from the Office of Community-Based Learning in trying to measure impact on students, a number of measures on students, including empathy, openness to new experience, and a number of other measures like that to see whether there's been change over time. We're still working out the details of when is the right moment to measure that, because it's kind of doesn't necessarily show up over the course of 3 months. It's hard to measure at the end of the semester when they're in finals of their first semester in college and they're stressed with other things. It's hard to get compliance, and it's hard to make sure that we understand what's going into their responses. So I've been working with a number of people, including many people in your office, to try to figure that out. In terms of the partners, they don't want the extra burden of trying to measure. They see that the measures that they use, the reason why that they're invested is that they tell me that the kids ask for soccer every year. The kids want to know where their UNF mentors are when they stop coming. So they are basically looking at the responses of the children. But these things are hard to measure, and it's extra work for everybody that on the partner side, I'm not sure they have the capacity for that. So those are, I wish I could find a good way to measure it. If anybody has any ideas, I'm all ears, because I would love to know the impact, but this is kind of mushy gushy stuff. So it's notoriously hard to measure.
And I'll say on ours, you would probably think that measuring success in the capstone design would be like the easiest one in engineering, because it's you build something, you test it, did it work? But what it actually turns out, obviously, because it's the capstone design, it's also one of the courses where we assess almost every single ABET outcome there is. And it's the one where all the ones that are not like the pure math and engineering ones come up. So, things like ethics, teamwork, working on writing skills. We're also going through this capstone design sequence is also the test sequence for the QEP, the writing around the curriculum. So this fall coming up, our capstone design 1 course is actually a Gordon writing course. So on our side, we've now added extra writing into that, working with the writing center. So on top of the design work, we're going to actually start adding some reflective writing pieces and things to assess their writing. We do multiple versions of written assignments through the semester. So, we're assessing, we call them all the more touchy-feely ABET outcomes and the writing outcomes. But I think the end of the day, for me, the how I kind of look at it when we have success is when companies, right at the end of the year, when we're turning over their projects, they say, well, can we just leave this one thing here because you're going to need that for the project next year that we're going to sponsor? And that they re-up, and then we get feedback from the companies just saying, they did this in the project and it was just amazing. We loved that. We loved working with the students. So that's the part that I use as my measure of success, is what the companies actually tell us afterwards, and that they contact me and say, hey, who should I hire? Something like that. That means that the students were doing something right. But in terms of assessment, it's a bear assessing stuff in the capstone design course for us.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a measure of success when a student is hired. And you led perfectly into my next question, which is, do you incorporate reflective practices for your students? If so, what do they look like? And maybe, what's the frequency of those reflective opportunities? And I guess let's start with Leslie.
Yeah, again, thank you to the Center for Community-Based Learning. We do incorporate reflective activities. The students write a individual, it's not an essay, but it's a series of 5 or 6 questions that try to get at this. And we combine that with a visual poster presentation. And then the Center for Community-Based Learning helps us by analyzing that data and giving us reports every year. And I pay a lot of attention to what those reports say about students, and tweak assignments, and tweak the ways we talk about the assignments, and tweak the reflective products every year to try to increase the impact and the students' recognition of that impact. So again, thank you guys. I could not be doing any of this without you guys. So.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. Alan?
Yeah, like I mentioned, so generally, this obviously being an engineering project, they turn in a big design report. They do multiple presentations, but it's all very, most of them are very technical. But we do we have a big innovation day at the end of the year every spring, where we invite all the companies and the public and everyone. And that one's less of a technical, because it's 15 minutes, the whole thing from start to finish. But like I just mentioned, this fall is going to be the first time with the Gordon writing classification that we're going to require a reflective piece from them. And what's going to be really interesting figuring this out, it's not going to be a reflective piece on their engineering project. It's going to be a reflective piece on their writing. So what we've been working with Linda Howell and the Writing Center is the importance of writing revision and multiple versions and reviewing stuff as you go through it, especially in engineering. As your project evolves, how you're writing about it needs to evolve. So what we've been doing the last couple of years, like we actually picked the first assignment they do as the problem statement, where they define what is the problem they're actually solving and what are their design requirements and their design constraints. And we actually have them turn in, I think they turn in 3 or 4 different versions of that during the semester. So they turn in their first one, and then we give them feedback on that on the technical side, but also on how they're actually writing it, so that they have to see how to improve their writing to actually explain what they're doing. So this fall is going to be the first time we're going to be working with Linda a lot this semester on what do we ask them to do in a reflective writing piece to discuss how do they think their writing has changed as they went through an engineering capstone design course. So that one's going to be really interesting to see what we come up with Linda and what it shows at the end of the year when we do it this year.
Wow. So would you say it's sort of safe to say that you incorporate a lot of those engineering soft skills through those reflective practices? So the writing and some of the other things that you don't generally think of when you think of engineering curriculum?
Yeah, and some of those things would be that, like when we look at the ethics, we make each team come up with a team value statement and to research what their company does and look into the different ethical things in that. So yeah, we do try to incorporate that, but the writing has been something that we've been trying to work on for several years now. So this should be the culmination where we have the first pass of everything going through on the writing side.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. So I believe this concludes the Q&A portion for our panelists, and I have just a couple of closing remarks. I'd like to thank all of you for attending the first session of our Back to Community Summer 2021 webinar series. I'd like to especially thank Dr. Leslie Kaplan and Dr. Alan Harris for your work as panelists today and sharing your experiences with community-based learning before, during, and even post-pandemic. I'm particularly excited about the opportunity to get back into the community for the upcoming year, and thank you for sharing your knowledge, experience, and expertise. It's most appreciated. I hope you have enjoyed the first session. Our next webinar, Practicums Make Perfect, Engaging with the Community to Accelerate Learning, will be held July 29th at 2 p.m. If you'd like to share or revisit any of this information in the future, this session, along with other previously recorded Center for Community-Based Learning webinars, can be found on our YouTube channel, which can be accessed via the Center for Community-Based Learning events page on our website. If you'd like to know more about community-based learning or how to get involved, please feel free to contact me. I will drop my email and a couple of links to our website in the chat. Again, thank you for participating today. We look forward to seeing you at future sessions, and please share these opportunities with your colleagues. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.